warm smell of cornbread filled the small kitchen. As Danielle Rivers moved between the stove and the counter, still in her scrubs after a 12-hour shift at the hospital, it was quiet, the kind of peaceful evening that made her grateful for even the simplest things. Amira was supposed to be home by now, but she often stayed out a little longer after school, choir practice or debate club. Danielle trusted her. Amira never got into trouble. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered, and the air shifted. A cold, official voice informed her that her daughter, Amira Rivers, had been taken into custody during a public demonstration downtown. Peaceful protest, they said. Danielle's heart clenched. She knew Amira had been passionate about the local case, making headlines. A young man wrongfully arrested. She had wanted to attend the protest. Danielle had asked her to be careful, to avoid confrontation. Amira had promised. Danielle didn't even change out of her uniform. She grabbed her keys and rushed to the police station, her hands trembling around the steering wheel. Her mind raced with 100 questions, none of which had answers. At the front desk, an officer barely looked up as he told her, "She's unavailable." "What does that mean?" Danielle asked, trying to stay calm. "Is she okay? I'm her mother." The officer shrugged. "It's under investigation. That's all I can say." Hours passed. No one told her anything. She waited. She demanded. She begged. But every door remained shut. Every answer deliberately vague. Her panic turned into rage, then despair. It wasn't until almost midnight that her phone rang again. This time, it was the hospital. Amira was in critical condition. Head trauma. Coma. Danielle's world fell apart in an instant. She ran through sterile white halls, her breath shallow, her legs barely able to carry her weight. She burst into the ICU room and froze at the sight of her daughter, her baby, connected to wires, a ventilator breathing for her, swollen and bruised beyond recognition. She collapsed into the chair beside the bed, her hand trembling as she reached for Amira's fingers. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. "Mummy's here." The doctors gave her soft-spoken explanations. Brain swelling, fractured ribs, facial bruises, but none of it made sense. Amira had been at a peaceful protest. How had this happened? Danielle pressed harder. Who brought her in? What happened during her arrest? No one had answers, but the nurses looked uneasy. One nurse, a young black woman with tired eyes and a quiet demeanor, approached Danielle later when no one was watching. She slipped a folded piece of paper into Danielle's palm and walked away without a word. Danielle opened it with shaking hands. 5 words, written in rushed pen. She was fine when brought in. Her heart shattered all over again. This wasn't an accident. Something happened between the station and the hospital. Someone had hurt her child, and they were covering it up. Danielle sat by Amira's bed all night, gripping her hand, listening to the beep of machines and the whoosh of artificial breath. She didn't cry anymore. The tears had turned to something colder. They hurt the wrong child, because they didn't know what her mother was capable of. Danielle stood in the hospital hallway as the morning sun began to stream through the windows, but there was no warmth in her chest. Only questions. Only fire. She had spent the night beside her daughter's hospital bed, listening to machines breathe for her child, machines that weren't there yesterday morning. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. Her fingers still clutched the note the nurse had slipped her. She was fine when brought in. It echoed louder than the silence from the police. She returned to the station, face worn, but voice unwavering. "I want answers," she said. "I want to know exactly what happened to my daughter." A new officer at the desk barely looked up. "Ma'am, all we can say is she resisted arrest." Danielle blinked, stunned. "She's in a coma. Her skull is fractured. You're telling me that's resisting?" "That's what the report says," he answered flatly. "You'll need to speak to legal. They wouldn't give her the names of the officers involved. They wouldn't tell her who was wearing body cams. When she asked about footage, she was told the cameras were either malfunctioning or under review. There was no straight answer. Everything was buried under red tape. Back at the hospital, Danielle sat at Amira's bedside again, trying to stay composed. A different nurse walked in, younger, quiet. Her eyes met Danielle's with a flash of guilt. She reached into her pocket and silently handed her a small manila envelope marked personal effects. Danielle opened it. Amira's wallet, her protest flyer, a single earring, no phone. She looked up. "Where's her phone?" The nurse looked around, then whispered, "It wasn't with her things when we received her." Danielle didn't speak. She didn't need to. The message was clear. Someone had removed it. Someone didn't want a record of what had happened. That night, Danielle took photos of Amira's injuries, her swollen face, the bruises down her side, the laceration above her eye. She uploaded them to social media with a short caption. "My daughter went to a peaceful protest. She came back in a coma. They say she resisted, but this is what resisting looks like in our town." Within hours, the post exploded. First, friends shared it, then friends of friends, then strangers. Within a day, it was trending nationally. People were angry. Some shared stories of their own experiences with the local police department, but just as many flooded Danielle's inbox with hate. She should have stayed home. Another thug pretending to be a hero. You're just stirring up drama. The town was divided. Local news channels picked up the story. Some anchors framed Amira as a teen provocateur. Others spoke about her good grades and volunteer work. The contrast was jarring. Two different girls were being painted on TV, and neither one was the full truth. Then came the patrol car. It started parking across the street from Danielle's house. No one got out. It just sat there, lights off, engine running, watching. Neighbours noticed. A few told her to be careful. "You're making too much noise," one whispered. "This town doesn't like noise." She wasn't just grieving anymore. She was being watched, labelled, silenced. Danielle sat at the window that night and stared right back at the cruiser. If they wanted her to be afraid, they'd have to try harder. She looked over at the hospital bag beside her couch. Inside were Amira's belongings, minus the most important one, her phone. And Danielle knew if she could find that phone, she'd find the truth. But they knew that too. That's why it was gone. Still, they had underestimated her. They thought taking her daughter would break her. All it did was wake her up. The days blurred into one another, but Danielle never left the hospital. She stayed beside Amira's bed, holding her hand, whispering stories, willing her to wake up. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped. The silence outside the room had become deafening. But online, the storm had just begun. Danielle's viral post had ignited something far beyond her small town. Hashtags with Amira's name began trending. National news outlets requested interviews. Civil rights organizations reached out. But it was one direct message that caught Danielle's attention. It was from Marcus Hale. She knew his name. Everyone did. A civil rights attorney with a fearless history of taking on police departments, city governments, and even federal institutions, and winning. His message was short, but it carried weight. "I believe you. If you want to fight this, I'll stand beside you. Pro bono." Danielle stared at the message for hours before replying, not because she doubted him, but because she knew what saying yes meant. And then she said it. "Let's do it." Marcus flew in the next day. He was calm, sharply dressed, and direct. But when he saw Amira's condition, his jaw tightened. "They're not getting away with this," he said quietly. They immediately filed a public records request for the body cam footage, citing civil rights concerns. As expected, the department stalled. "It's under internal review," they claimed. Marcus wasn't surprised. "They're playing delay games," he told Danielle, "but we'll keep pressing." Meanwhile, something was shifting in town. More people began to speak out, especially the youth. By the end of the week, the hospital's front lawn was covered in handmade signs. Justice for Amira. We are not threats. She was only seen. Protesters showed up outside the police station. Peaceful, determined. Teachers, parents, students. Some held candles. Others held megaphones. Danielle stood among them with a photo of Amira pinned to her chest. Her voice shook as she spoke, but she didn't stop. "They want me to disappear," she said. "But I won't, because my daughter deserves to wake up in a world where her life is worth protecting." The mayor called for calm. He asked residents to be respectful of the investigation. Danielle's response was swift. Calm didn't protect my daughter. While the town wrestled with its conscience, help came from an unexpected place. A college sophomore named Elijah Green, a tech student and local activist. He messaged Danielle late one night. "I used to tutor Amira. I found something. You need to hear this." He had hacked into Amira's cloud backup, not to snoop, but to retrieve anything that might have survived deletion. And he found them. 3 voice memos, auto-saved just before the phone went silent. Danielle listened to them alone, her fingers trembling. The first was Amira giggling with a friend. The second was her narrating the protest, describing the chanting, the energy, the pride. The third was chaos. Shouts, sirens, the voice of a man yelling, "Get down!" Amira's voice, frightened but calm. "I didn't do anything." Then a loud thud. Then screaming, "Well, why are you hitting me? I didn't do anything." And then silence. Danielle sat still for a long time after the audio ended. There were no tears, only fire. She sent the file to Marcus. "We release it tomorrow," she said. "No more hiding." Because now there was proof, and the fight was just beginning. The morning after the audio leak, Danielle stepped out to check her mailbox and froze. Her garage door was covered in red spray paint. "Liar! Shut up! Hoax, Mom." The words dripped like blood. The neighbours stayed inside. No one came to help. No one asked if she was okay. Danielle took a deep breath, walked back inside, and called Marcus. "They've started." He didn't ask what she meant. He just said, "Hold the line. We expected this." But it didn't stop there. Later that week, Danielle was called into a meeting at the hospital where she worked. Her supervisor sat behind a stack of HR papers, eyes downcast. "We've received complaints," he said awkwardly, "that your public activity is causing unrest." Danielle knew what he meant. Someone was pressuring the hospital to let her go, to silence her. But she didn't back down. "If you're firing me for being a mother, go ahead," she said. "I'll walk out the front door." They didn't fire her that day, but the message was clear. She was no longer welcome. Then came Child Protective Services. A knock on her door, a woman with a clipboard. "We've received a report," she said coolly, "that your home environment may not be safe for your daughter." Danielle stared at her, stunned. "She's in a coma," she said. "You want to investigate that?" "I'm just following protocol," the woman replied. Danielle shut the door without a word. Her hands shook with rage. They weren't just trying to discredit her, they were trying to destroy her completely. And then, as if to twist the knife, Officer Brad Klein filed a defamation lawsuit against her. "He claims your accusations have damaged his reputation," Marcus told her. "It's laughable, but they're trying to bury you in court." Danielle sat in the silence of her living room, looking at the photo of Amira on the mantel, laughing, alive, free. They were trying to break her, not just physically, but emotionally, legally, financially. But she wasn't done. The next week, the city council held a public forum. Protesters lined the streets outside. Reporters filled the hall. Danielle sat in the front row, her knuckles white. When they called her name, she stood up slowly, walked to the podium. The room fell silent. Her voice was quiet, shaky at first, but every word carried weight. My daughter didn't come home from a war. She came home from a protest, a peaceful one. And now she's lying in a hospital bed because someone in uniform decided she wasn't worth the air she breathed. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. You tell me to stay quiet, to wait, but I can't wait while she sleeps hooked to machines. I can't wait while you let men like Klein walk free. She paused. My daughter is not your punching bag. The room held its breath. The clip went viral within hours. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. Tears, anger, solidarity. And slowly, the tide turned. Black churches began sending donations. National civil rights leaders reached out, offering public support. A mural of Amira appeared on a wall near the city square, painted by local artists guarded day and night by volunteers. Danielle had been called a liar, a troublemaker, a problem. But she was still standing, and now she wasn't standing alone. The leak came suddenly, early in the morning, just after sunrise. A video link quietly appeared on social media, shared first by anonymous activists, then by thousands. Danielle's phone buzzed uncontrollably. She opened the video with trembling hands. It was bodycam footage, real, raw, undeniable. Amira stood in a crowded street, chanting with a group of peaceful protesters. She had her phone out, recording. She wasn't yelling, wasn't aggressive, just present. Then Officer Brad Klein appeared in frame, shouting at the protesters to disperse. The video zoomed and jittered as the officer moved. Amira backed away slowly, clearly visible, hands raised in the air. She said one line that cut like a blade. I'm not resisting, I'm complying. Then, without warning, Klein rushed her. He slammed her to the ground, his full weight landing on her back. Her head hit the pavement. Another officer held her down. Klein punched her twice while she was already restrained. She screamed, and then the video ended. The world changed in minutes. News outlets scrambled to verify the footage. Within hours, it was confirmed authentic. The police department issued a shaky statement. The officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. Klein and 2 others were suspended, but not arrested, not charged. Danielle stared at the television in disbelief. They broke her skull, she whispered, and they still get to go home tonight. The public outrage was immediate. Thousands marched outside the police department. Journalists swarmed the hospital, and Danielle, who once stood alone, was now at the centre of a national reckoning. She appeared on national news that night, her face tired but resolute. Sitting across from a primetime host, she told her story. I'm not a politician, she said. I'm a mother, and I want every person watching this to imagine their child, walking, dreaming, loving, and then being left in a coma for exercising her rights. The host teared up. Within hours, celebrities began to share the video and Danielle's interview. Activists, actors, musicians, politicians, everyone was watching. A GoFundMe created by a family friend for Amira's recovery was suddenly flooded. Within 3 days, it crossed $1 million. People donated in Amira's name. Some left comments like, "For my daughter." Others simply wrote, "We believe you." The pressure reached its boiling point. The district attorney, who had remained silent for weeks, called an emergency press conference. Her voice was stiff, but the words were clear. In light of newly surfaced evidence and the overwhelming concern from the public, our office will formally open a criminal investigation and file charges related to the use of excessive force during the incident involving Miss Amira Rivers. The crowd outside the courthouse erupted. Danielle didn't smile, not yet, but for the first time, she exhaled. That same day, Marcus Hale filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the department, the city, and the officers involved. The complaint was 87 pages long, and brutal. It included the leaked body cam footage, eyewitness testimonies, hospital reports, and Danielle's collected timeline of every failed call, every lie, every delay. Within a week, a federal judge ruled the case would proceed. No delays, no dismissals. The headlines screamed, "Mother sues entire police department after daughter's brutal beating." Bodycam bomb drops, town faces national reckoning. That night, Danielle returned to Amira's bedside. She held her daughter's hand and whispered, "They finally saw what they did to you." Then she added, "And now they'll answer for it." The courtroom was packed, every seat taken, every eye watching. Outside, camera crews lined the sidewalks, their lights glowing like spotlights on a stage. People had travelled from across the country to witness the case that had become a symbol of something far greater than one mother's fight. It was about power, race, justice, and reckoning. Inside, Danielle sat silently at the plaintiff's table beside Marcus Hale. She wore a navy blazer, her shoulders stiff, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Amira's photo rested in a simple silver frame before her, smiling, bright-eyed, untouched by the violence that had changed everything. On the other side of the courtroom sat Officer Brad Klein in a crisp suit, his expression flat. His legal team, paid for by the police union, looked confident and prepared. They treated the cameras like old friends. The trial began. The defense wasted no time. They painted Amira as combative and disruptive. They implied her presence at the protest was antagonistic. They said she escalated the interaction. They pointed to grainy protest footage and said she was shouting. They referenced her social media posts and said she had a history of anti-police sentiment. They even questioned Danielle's parenting, subtly, strategically. How much control did Ms. Rivers really have over her daughter? Danielle clenched her jaw, but said nothing, until it was her turn to speak. The courtroom fell silent when she took the stand. She began slowly. "I raised my daughter to respect everyone, even when they didn't respect her." Her voice wavered, but her gaze was steady. She never fought anyone. She didn't have to. She believed in words, in change, in peace. "I taught her to never fight hate with hate." She paused, her voice trembling. And look where it got her. In the jury box, a black woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. A young man beside her clenched his fists beneath the table. Marcus Hale called up his witnesses methodically. Doctors confirmed the trauma Amira sustained. Medical records proved she hadn't been injured before entering police custody. Then came Elijah Green, the tech student. He sat upright in his wrinkled shirt and tie, nervous but determined. I retrieved 3 voice memos from Amira's cloud account. They were timestamped within minutes of her arrest. He played the final audio for the court. Amira's frightened voice rang through the speakers. "I didn't do anything. Why are you hitting me?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Klein looked down at the table. The final blow came in Marcus's closing argument. He stood tall, his tone deliberate, his voice echoing through the room. They said this was about safety, about law and order, but what law allows a child to be crushed for using her voice? What order is preserved by hiding the truth and deleting evidence? He gestured to the jury. If this is what protecting and serving looks like, slamming teenagers to the ground, silencing mothers, destroying lives, then we don't need more badges. We need new protectors. He let the silence hang. Then he stepped back. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. When they returned, the judge asked the foreman to stand. We, the jury, find the defendants, the city, the police department, and Officer Brad Klein liable for excessive use of force, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and violation of civil rights. Danielle's hands flew to her mouth. A collective exhale rippled through the room. Reporters sprinted outside. Applause erupted from the gallery. Some cried, some shouted, some just sat in stunned silence. The judge announced damages, several million in compensation and punitive charges. But for Danielle, it wasn't about the money. It was about the truth. She looked up at the bench and whispered, "You heard her." Outside, flashbulbs popped. Questions flew. But Danielle just stood there, staring into the crowd, tired, proud, and unbroken. Justice had finally spoken, and it had spoken in her daughter's name. In the days following the verdict, the town felt like a different place. The air wasn't lighter, it was heavier, charged with a quiet electricity, like a storm had passed, but left the skies forever changed. The first domino fell quickly. The police chief, who had dodged interviews and hid behind pending investigations, resigned with a 2-sentence letter posted to the city website. No apology, no statement, just gone. Next came Officer Brad Klein's sentencing. The courtroom was packed again, this time quieter. No high drama, just accountability. The judge didn't mince words. Your actions were a betrayal of public trust, of your oath, and of basic human decency. Klein was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. As he was led away in cuffs, Danielle watched from the front row, her expression unreadable. She didn't cry. She didn't cheer. But something in her eyes finally settled. Soon after, the Department of Justice announced a pattern and practice investigation into the entire police department. They cited systemic abuse, racial profiling, excessive force, and suppression of evidence. A team of federal agents moved into town hall like surgeons opening a wound that had been festering for years. Federal grants and funding were frozen. New cases were paused, old ones reopened. Within a month, over a dozen officers quietly resigned or retired. Some left town, others were subpoenaed. The department shrank in size and in silence. But the most powerful change didn't come from the government. It came from Danielle. She declined major interviews and book deals. She didn't want fame. She wanted function. So she launched the Amira Justice Fund, a non-profit that would provide legal aid, mental health services, and media advocacy for families affected by police violence. The fund gained national attention and immediate donations. Civil rights lawyers across the country volunteered their time. Survivors reached out with stories they'd never shared before. Danielle listened to everyone. At the next city council meeting, less hostile this time, Danielle stood again. This time, not to plead, but to propose. Every public servant in this city, she said, should be trained to see people as people, not threats. She presented a plan for mandatory de-escalation training, anti-bias workshops, and community liaisons to review use of force reports. It passed unanimously. Then, in a moment that would have once seemed impossible, the city appointed its first black female police chief, Sherilyn Tate, a former civil rights liaison from another state. She was tough, transparent, and unapologetically committed to rebuilding trust. In her first press conference, she said, "We do not serve power, we serve people, and we cannot serve people we do not see." The words were printed on banners across city buildings. Change came not with sirens, but with silence, listening, policy, and presence. Danielle stood at the edge of it all, not leading rallies, not shouting into microphones, but building something lasting. Her daughter still hadn't woken up, but Danielle believed she would. And when she did, Danielle wanted her to wake up in a world that finally saw her. Because Amira hadn't just survived injustice, she had ignited transformation. The world outside had changed. The streets were quieter, but painted with meaning. Murals stretched across once blank walls, bright, determined, full of stories. One stood taller than the rest, towering over the city square. Amira, eyes closed, head slightly tilted upward, like she was listening to something only she could hear. Around her bloomed painted wildflowers, Below her, the words, silenced but never gone. Amira Rivers, hope in bloom. Danielle visited it often, not for the cameras, but for herself. She would stand in front of it, hand to her chest, remembering every breath, every hour she'd spent in that sterile hospital room, every courtroom whisper, every name they called her. But here, in this place, her daughter was not a victim. She was a voice, a vision, a beginning. Months had passed since the verdict. The city renamed the old municipal park, where children now played freely, where people gathered in peace. It was now called Amira Rivers Peace Park. Trees lined the paths, planted in honour of each life changed by Amira's story. A bench near the fountain bore a plaque that simply read, "She taught us to see." But the moment Danielle waited for most was still ahead. She was in Amira's hospital room, as she had been for months. The machines had grown quieter, the doctors had become cautiously hopeful, and this morning, something felt different. Danielle could feel it in the way the air moved. Then it happened. A flutter. Amira's fingers twitched beneath Danielle's hand. Her eyelids quivered. Danielle froze, afraid to blink. And then, slowly, like the sun rising after a storm, Amira's eyes opened. They were unfocused, dazed, but they were there. Danielle gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Amira?" she whispered. The girl blinked again, her lips parted slightly, the muscles weak, but her eyes moved, softly, slowly, until they found Danielle's. Recognition lit in them, dim but real. Danielle leaned in, voice breaking with joy and pain. "It's me, baby. I'm here. I've always been here." Amira didn't speak, not yet, but her eyes filled. A single tear rolled from the corner of her eye. Danielle took her hand gently, tears streaming down her own face. "You changed the world without saying a word," she whispered. Amira's hand tightened ever so slightly around hers. News of her awakening spread quietly at first, shared through the staff, then friends, then the world. The media called it a miracle. But Danielle knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was a fight, one her daughter never gave up on, even in silence. The mayor, once hesitant to take a stand, now stood before Danielle and the community in the newly renamed park. He held a folded paper in his hand, his voice nervous but clear. "On behalf of the city, we failed you. We failed your daughter. And for that, we are sorry, not only with words, but with action." The crowd applauded softly. Danielle nodded, accepting not the apology, but the responsibility they had now taken on. And the world hadn't stopped listening. Danielle was soon invited to speak at the United Nations during a summit on global justice reform. Standing beneath the weight of international flags, she told Amira's story, not just as a tragedy, but as a blueprint for change. "We think justice begins in courtrooms," she said, "but it begins in the hearts of mothers. And sometimes it speaks not in rage, but in refusal. Refusal to forget, refusal to be silent, refusal to accept that our children are expendable." When she finished, the room stood in silence, and then erupted in applause. Back home, Amira continued to heal, slowly, gently. A new kind of life unfolding, one where she was more than a headline, more than a victim, more than a girl whose voice had been stolen. Because now, she had the world's ear. And the world had finally learned to listen. They beat her child into silence, but they awakened a storm they could never cage. A mother, a voice, a reckoning.